Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to continue our X-ray coverage, and today we're talking about understanding coverage. And within the world of X-ray, that means something very specific. It means being able to basically trace your requirements to the actual tests. And it's going to be a fun and exciting one. This one's going to be probably one of the more longer ones, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and let's jump in. All right, so again, just to reiterate, this is the understanding coverage using Xray in Jira Cloud. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this class. I thought I had logged in already, but apparently I got logged out. Let's log in again because this worked earlier. I got to get out of this one. They make me go through some hoops here. Unbelievable. Folks, I had this already set up from earlier, so I'm not sure what's going on. All right, I think we're ready, and I think the stream's good. Hello, the boss is in town watching. And so we got to be on our best behavior today, folks. All right, let's jump in. We're going to go into our introduction. We'll go full screen so everybody can see better. And apologies for the vertical format. My intention was to stream this in mobile format, but it's the first time I've done it, so I got confused with the dual links. But we've learned, so tomorrow we'll have dual links for vertical and horizontal. All right, so what are our training goals for today? We're going to understand coverage basics. We're going to understand how to perform coverage analysis, understand the differences between status of test runs, tests, and requirements, understand how coverage is calculated, and understand how to create custom test steps, statuses, and test statuses. Before you begin, you should understand some coverage concepts, coverage analysis overview, assessing the status of a test run, assessing the status of a test for some scope, assessing the status of coverable issues, configuration use cases, and if you're on the data center or server versions of Xray, you'll also be able to do the special calculated custom fields. All right. So before you begin, a quick concept overview. A test is a test idea, such as a test case template, not related with execution. A test run represents a run of a given test in the context of some scheduled test execution. It's like an instance of the test containing both the specification and the recorded result. And then the requirement, which is really the meat of today's episode, is a coverable issue or work item that can, and it can be any work item like a story, an epic, tasks, whatever else you got going on inside of Jira. And if you remember from yesterday's session, it can also even be a bug. But as long as they're configured, and there's a configuration, so definitely check out that video where we covered how to configure Xray so that you have these items as requirements, right? Otherwise, it won't be considered a requirement. So as long as you have it set up to be a requirement, you can do it. And here's a reiteration, a bug can also be a requirement. All right, so just some recaps there, nothing too special. Let's jump into some coverage concepts. So what is it? What are we trying to answer? Let's go full screen for this again. So imagine this story aimed at version 1.0 of your site. A user, or as a user, I can log into my personal dashboard so that I can see some private reports. So some questions that are going to pop up. Can we provide a quick answer to them? Is this test covered? Is this covered by test of any sort? So if you are a test-driven development company, you're going to love this, right? Because one of the first things you should be asking yourself is, what test? How do we test this? Testers love this stuff, right? Developers, maybe not so much, because usually from a development standpoint, a test means more work. Where do those tests perform? Where do those tests perform? Wow, if I knew English, that might also help. Where do those tests perform? Were they successful? Were they successful in Chrome, on mobile devices? What if we just consider the critical test? Is the login okay? How is the login at different testing stages? And now that 1.0 is over, how is the login on V2? And how is the login on multiple versions we're maintaining in parallel? So again, those are just some quick questions you want to be able to answer quickly. And so your coverage indicates to a certain point if a covered item, for example, the requirement, a story, a task, an epic, if it's covered by testing, and what is its outcome in a certain scope. It's a way of assessing the status of your deliverables. So therefore, it's a quick way to understand these two questions. Is this story, for example, covered by any tests? And if so, how is that test on this release based on the results of those tests obtained for that release? Be aware of semantics. An Xray coverage is used as an abbreviation for test coverage or requirement coverage. It's not code coverage. So this is very important because code coverage is slightly different. Really, I would say kind of related, not really, but you want some sort of a unit test for your code to do code coverage. So it's still kind of like in the same spirit, But this is specifically, we're looking at requirements, epics, stories, tasks, right? The things that describe what needs to be done inside of Jira. And we're just checking to see, do we have a test against that what? So coverage is a heuristic, therefore it's a rough simplification and should be considered as such, relies on a relation between the covered item and test issues, is multidimensional as its value depends on how you want to analyze it. Why? Because the same test may be performed in different context scopes, i.e. versions, environments, and plans, and so on. So a couple of quick questions. Coverage indicates that this story is okay. Does it mean that it doesn't have problems? No, it only means that the story has been tested by some test and that they were overall successful. It does not tell you whether those tests were extensive or if there were covered important risks. The story can have important bugs or gaps. It depends on the testing you've performed. The coverage indicates that the story is not okay. Does this mean it can't be delivered? No. It only means that the story has been tested by some tests and that one or more were unsuccessful. You'll have to analyze the results on whether and decide whether the failed tests are irrelevant. And if something is not 100% accurate, is it helpful? Useful. As it happens with any heuristic, this is something that can provide you quick insight and help you take decisions. Its value depends on the quality of your testing. Do you address what matters to the stakeholder? So just keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to the next item, which is going to be, we're going to cover, wow, this is a lot of slides, coverage analysis overview. So what is coverage analysis? So it's a powerful real-time coverage analysis for requirements and tests. It provides real-time info on the status of tests for a given scope, and it provides real-time info on the status of coverable issues. Again, work items. Requirements uses stories for some scope. So what is a scope? It's the context for analysis, where, how we want to analyze the test or the requirement. For example, we may want to analyze the same requirement in V1 and in V2. Analysis scope. The analysis scope tells how we want to analyze a given requirement or test by considering just a subset of test runs. For version V, only test runs from test executions assigned to version V are considered. For test plan T, only test runs from test executions assigned to test plan T are considered. Based on the latest results, no revision. Latest test runs from recent test executions are considered. And optionally, in test environment E, only test runs from test executions assigned to test environments E are considered. Analyze it at a high level or at a more granular level for each test environment. If no test environment is specified, then Xray calculates the status based on the joint values for all the different test environments having scheduled executions. So folks, one key thing to consider here and a takeaway is that you want to make sure that you're using versions in Jira, because if you're not using the versions in Jira, then you're kind of leaving a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but you're leaving a good portion of what Xray is expecting to be available, right? Versions is going to play a critical role in ensuring that the functionality of Xray is appropriate. And so keep that in mind, that if you're going to use Xray and you're not using versions, you might be at a slight disadvantage. Let's talk about the types of statuses and the dependency. So there are different statuses. Some of them, as they depend on analysis, are dynamic. Reported statuses for test run steps and implicitly test runs are single value. They are not dependent on other variables or analysis criteria, the recorded facts. The status of a test and the coverage status of a requirement is dynamic. It depends on how you analyze them, thus implicitly on the test runs considered as scope. I hope we get some examples about this. So these are the types of statuses and the dependencies. So for test run, we have, for the test steps, we have like this to do, we're executing it, we failed it, or we passed it. Now we have the status for the test run itself, which is very similar to do, executing, failed, and passed. Then we have the test status, which is going to also be to do, executing, failed, and passed. But then we ultimately have the coverage, right? So based on these statuses, whether we have the test run step or the test run or the actual test status, depending on if those executed correctly, if they passed or if they failed, that's going to impact ultimately the status of the coverage, whether it's uncovered, which means no tests, right? There's no tests against this, whether it's not run because we haven't executed yet, whether it's not okay because one of these in any given step failed, or if it's all okay because they all passed, right? So there's like a little bit of a trickle down effect here. let's talk about the status of a test. So how a given test is currently performing in some scope/context. So whenever speaking about the status of a test, we need to give it some additional context. For example, in which version, since it depends on where and how you want to analyze it. Again, this is why the version is going to be coming straight from your fixed version in Jira. So you want to make sure you're using your fixed versions there. So was it executed successfully? And in what version? And in what browser and device? So that all depends on the latest consolidated results obtained by the test within some scope. So it provides real-time info on the status of coverable issues for some contexts. Thus, it has no relation whatsoever to the workflow status. This is important, folks. Each work item in Jira, because your test step, your test plan, your test run, all of the, not the run, but the test execution, all of those are work types. They all have a workflow status. And that is just going to be automatically, if you don't touch it, it's going to be whatever workflow status you have for your stories and your tasks and your bugs, because that's just the way Jira works. You can, however, break that up. It's a little bit more of an advanced thing. But the takeaway here is whatever you have in your workflow defined, it's not the same as the statuses of these tests, right? These right here, to do, executing, failed, and passed, those are going to be the ones that we care about. Okay, status of a test depends on how you want to analyze it for a given context. So the same test can pass for some context, such as version 1, and fail for another version, like version 2, and then not even run for another. So status of a test, possibility. So we have passed, the test is successful for that scope. Remember, the scope is going to be important. To do, the test is pending verification validation for that scope. Executing, the test is in the middle of a verification and validation for that scope. And then we have fail, which means something went wrong. So you can create your own test status and map it with the desired coverage status. Besides regular coverage status, you can map the new status with unknown coverage status. If your scope doesn't include a specific test environment, then Xray will consider the latest test runs from all environments where you had executions on it. So good to know that Xray has your back, but it's always the best practice to use that release or that fixed version so that it knows the latest version. We have the status of a test. So a given test is pass on version 3 if the latest test run for that test in version 3 was pass. Pass on version 4 if the latest test run for that test in version 4 was a pass. And then we can have a fail on version 4 if the latest test run for that test failed. So how we identify that a test run was performed against a certain version of the system under test? Well, test run executed in version X means that the test run is part of a test execution assigned to version X. And I really do hope we see examples of these, because we need to jump into Jira to see this, for it to truly make sense. All right, so now we have the environments example here. So given the test has been executed against multiple test environments, right? So for example, we can have a fail on version 4 in a specific environment. So if the latest test run for that test in version 4 is an environment X, it was a fail. If we have a pass on version 3, right? If for all environments with the test runs for that test executed in version 3, the latest test run was a pass. And then we could have a fail on version 4 if for any environment, doesn't matter the environment, which is the difference here, right? So it is possible for you to pass on a specific version, but then fail either in a specific environment or just fail in general. Like, all those are possibilities. So how do we identify that a test run was performed on a given version using a specific environment? So the test run executed in version X and environment X means that the test run is part of the test execution assigned to version X and test environment X. So I'm assuming, what I'm hoping we get to see a little bit later, is that Jira, specifically the test execution, will have these two fields that you populate before you go into it. Now let's talk about the status of a coverable issue, aka a requirement. So how a given issue currently is from a quality standpoint in some scope/context. The status of a requirement tells you information about its current state from a quality perspective. For example, is it covered with test cases? If so, have they been validated successfully? And if so, in which version? So whenever speaking about the status of a requirement, we need to give it some additional context. For example, in which version, since it depends on where and how you analyze it. Depends on the latest consolidated results obtained for the test cover within some context, thus it's not the workflow status. So coverage status depends on how you want to analyze your requirement for what context. The same requirement can be okay for some context, not okay for another, and like not even run for a completely other one. The status of this is ultimately the ones that matter, right? These, when we're looking at an overall coverage, right? This is what we care about. And I do believe you can add more, but I don't well, we'll look at some examples in a bit. So the calculated value depends on the tests and the results. So we have okay, which means all the tests passed. We have not okay, which means at least one. It's very critical. At least one failed. We have not run, which means that everything's either in a to-do, aborted, or executing, which means that nothing has passed nor failed. We have unknown. This is an interesting one to me, where at least one test associated with an issue is unknown, and there are no tests with failed. And then we have uncovered, where there is no test associated in any way, shape, or form. We don't want uncovered. Uncovered is worse than failed, I would say. Some coverage analysis examples. So this requirement for the sensor is uncovered. This requirement has no link test. Not good. It's okay on version 2, which means it passed everything on version 2. Not okay on version 1, which means at least one test failed on version 1. Not okay on version 1 in environment X, right? Which means that at least one test failed in a specific environment. And then we have okay in version 1 in a specific environment. So again, this just means everything passed. So in the next video, we're going to analyze coverage for a story right from its issue screen. You'll learn how to coverage status is not a single value, but multidimensional instead. The same story can be okay in one version and or environment and not okay in other ones. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. So very similar to what we've done before, folks. We're going to play the video. We're going to mute the audio, and I'm going to basically provide commentary of what we're seeing here. So here we are inside of Jira. We're inside of a story. We're coming down to the test coverage section. And this is going to show you the statuses of all those tests. But you can see here that we have different test environments. Now, these are defined, or you can define them in your Xray settings, so you can build different environments. In this particular case, we have a web app that was across multiple browsers. Then we have the different versions. Now, what I don't know, and what I'm going to go check is, are these versions connected with our fixed versions that are in Jira, which I'm leaning towards thinking that that's the case. But we ultimately have different versions and different environments, and you have these two variables, these two levers to push and pull, so that ultimately you can record the different variants of your tests. It's very important, folks, right? You don't, I have a real world example many years ago, and I'm going to pause this here real quick. Many years ago, I was in a team, I was in a situation where we were building an application and worked through it the entire summer. Interestingly enough, I still run into my manager, and I don't think she knows that I tell this story to everybody. If she did, then she probably wouldn't talk to me anymore. But nonetheless, we were working on this very complicated conversion from one version of Linux to a different version of Linux. It was my entire summer intern. Well, it wasn't really an intern. It was just my summer project. And I did all my testing in Firefox, because Firefox and Internet Explorer were the two approved browsers back in the day. So I did all my testing in Firefox, but I never did Internet Explorer because, one, I hate Internet Explorer, and two, my manager told me not to worry about it because it was not going to be a problem. Well, it turns out the weekend that we went to cut over, we didn't do any testing, official testing. And the little testing that we did do, I did it locally, and I was just doing it in Firefox. Things are good. I gave the thumbs up. Let's do the migration. Well, it turns out that we were doing a PHP application, and Internet Explorer, and only Internet Explorer, had this situation where it was dropping the first element of any like PHP form. And the first element of a PHP form happened to be the identifier for the entire form. And so basically none of the data was ever making it across because the PHP backend couldn't understand what data it was looking at. And so this is a huge problem, very big problem, that had we done something like this where we had our different environments listed in a tool like Xray, we would have been able to pass and fail those things over time. So very important here. Now, I want to show you here on the right-hand side, it looks like we have some extra items for looking at your test environments. And so it's just really important, folks, that you spend some time here to set these up correctly and thoroughly, so that you have, like, maybe you are building something for Safari, maybe you're building mobile apps, maybe you're just make sure you're covering your different environments. It's not always just like you're staging pre-prod and prod. Like, this should be a little bit more specific to like what tools or environments you're using here. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is going to be assessing the status of a test run. And this is a big one, folks. These are 16 slides, so bear with me here and make sure you hit the subscribe button. All right, so let's take a look at the status of a test run. So corresponds to the result that was reported against the test run. So this represents the recorded result for the test in the context for some test execution against some version of the system under test in some environment. And this can be explicitly inline or automatically based on the test step level results. And so here we have a test run that failed. So where can you view it? So it's usually visible in sections of the test run. So the execution screen itself in the execution status, the test run parallels, the test run panel in the test issue screen, the test execution screen, the traceability report, and then the test runs list report gadget. So there's a lot of different places, 4 different places where you can ultimately see whether your test runs passed or if they failed. Your default test run statuses these are the ones that Xray is going to give you, which cannot be modified or deleted. It's going to be passed, to do, executing, and failed. Very, very important to note that these cannot be deleted. Your custom test run statuses. So these are going to be, I guess, something you can create. All right. So you can't change the first one's passed, to do, executing, and failed, but you can add your own. And so custom statuses may be created in Xray administrative setting. Status can be marked as final, able to specify how the status contributes to the calculation of the requirement coverage status, and ranking is used to compare statuses under certain circumstances. We're going to explain that a little bit later. So when starting, try the default settings. They work for most users and can likely also work for you. Keep it simple. Don't create many custom statuses as they increase complexity. Discuss it with the team to assess their real needs. Computing the overall status of a test run. So the status of a test run can be set explicitly or inferred from steps. In general, it's computed as: use the existing test run status if it hasn't been enforced manually, otherwise proceed. If a test has a manual step or multiple inner results, obtain the test status mapped to each reported test step status. Compare all the previously mapped test statuses together. So how do this test statuses compare with each other? So fail wins over any status. As long as we have one, we're done. Statuses marked with as final win over intermediary ones. Use ranking of a mapped test status, and any status wins over pass. If all map statuses are only a mix of to do and pass, then the status of test runs will be considered as being executed. So this is not quite clear, but all this means is that we want to be very careful when we're adding new statuses. We want to make sure that we explicitly call out the ones that are going to be final. We want to give them the appropriate color, and then the requirement status is going to help us with that coverage part at the end. So test run statuses and test step statuses. So the test step statuses impact the test run status. Understanding how they're mapped together is crucial to understand how the overall test run status is calculated. The impact is determined by the test status mapped for each test step status. So what are our test step statuses? So Xray provides some built-in test step statuses which cannot be modified or deleted. And then, like previously, you can add custom test step statuses that can be created in the Xray settings to be able to specify how the status contributes to the calculation of the overall test run. There is no ranking for test step statuses. So we have the ones that we can't change, which is pass, to do, executing, and fail. And I know, right? Test step status is a really hard word to say. Skip and my fail. These are going to be custom steps that we create. We give them a custom color. We give them the test status, which is going to either pass it or fail it. And this one's custom. And it looks like we might even have it from up here. Yeah, so we made a custom status over here for failed discardable. And if we have a failed discardable, then that's going to map to this my fail. Fail but continue. Which basically means like I made a mistake, right? So this is basically saying like, hey, I made a boo-boo, but don't mess the whole thing up. All right, so let's look at an example. So we have test step 1, 2, and 3, all 3 pass. Yay. We have a pass, to do, and pass, which means we're executing. We're not done yet. So we're looking and we're currently executing until this one either goes to pass or fail. Then we have a pass or fail, which means as long as one fails, folks, we're done. We failed it. Okay. And then we have the ranking of the test statuses. So we have pass, step failed, step passed. So this is calculated for our custom pass. So from the map statuses, custom pass has higher ranking than custom fail and also pass. Interesting. All right. Final status over intermediary. I don't think that was anything valuable there. All right, in the next video, we're going to learn how status of test run changes given the result status is reported in individual steps of a manual scripted test. We'll execute the test and its test steps from scratch and see the calculated status of the test run. So let's see this all in action here, because this is a lot of test steps. Test step status. Lots of words. Okay, only a minute. Let's jump in. Let's go full screen so we can all see it. All right, so we are going to be, let's see where we're starting off at. So we have a test execution status of to do. We have our steps here. Everything's to do. We haven't done anything, but we're going to manually pass it, right? So we had step 1 and it passed. As you can see, because we have one of the tests, one of the steps in progress or passed, then the whole test is now executing. It's in motion, right? We're working through it. Now we passed 3 and we passed it, right? Because all 3 basically passed. But if any of these were to fail, right? If we're going to fail one here, then you're going to see that the overall test execution status is now failed. Because again, as long as only one of them failed, we're donezos. So at that point, it doesn't matter if you have multiple ones, the status is going to remain the same as failed. And so all it takes is one to kind of mess it up until they all pass. Once they all pass, then that's when we're going to go back to pass. But as you can see, none of that's going to change until you pass them all or redo it again. All right, let's take a look at assessing the status of a test given the scope. All right, so the latest consolidated status of the test. Wow, I cannot say these T words so much for a specific scope context. So depends on where and how you're analyzing your test. So generally, it represents the latest test result or the latest results obtained for that test in that context. So more grained or high-level overview. That isn't grained and high-level overview like opposites. It can involve consolidating results from multiple test environments. For example, the status of a test for version 1.0 depends on consolidating the latest results for Chrome and Firefox. Now, if you're in the data center or Xray versions, if you're in the data center or server versions of Xray, the test run status custom field provides a sneak peek for it, explained ahead. So what can you see? Coverage. Test coverage panel in the requirement issue here. Or where can you see the coverage? Okay, see, folks, I didn't write these slides. There's clearly words missing here, okay? It's not me and my bad English. It's definitely the slides here. So where can you see the coverage? Well, you're going to be able to see it in the requirement issue. So you can see it there. You'll be able to see it in the traceability report. And then there's a test list report and gadget. You can see it down there as well. So a couple of different places where you can see this. Calculating the status of a test for scope. So obtain the test runs based on analysis scope, i.e. the context. Obtain all the distinct environments involved in the previous test runs. And for each test environment, obtain the latest test run. Usually this will be the last one executed finished. If none of those exist, or if we want to simply consider the last test run, no matter if it was executed or not, just pick the latest test run created. Again, folks, for you DC and server folks, check the final statuses have precedence over non-final statuses. Now let's talk about calculating the status of a test for a scope. So if the results from multiple environments are involved, then a joint status must be calculated. We have failed status wins over all the other statuses based on their ranking in the test status settings, and then any status wins over pass. So the test status over time. So with final status have precedence over non-final enabled. All right, so if we had a to-do and then we passed, then we failed, then we pass and we go to to-do, this is the considered test run because it is the latest having a final status. Thus, the test will pass for the given scope. When the final statuses have precedence over the non-final enabled, although this test run has a non-final status, it is considered because it is the only existing one. Thus, the test will be to do for the given scope. With final statuses have precedence over non-final disabled, the test run is considered because it is the latest one created. Thus, the test will be to do for the given scope. multiple environments. What is the overall result whenever a test is scheduled for multiple environments? Environment Chrome can to do, fail, pass. Environment Firefox is to do, pass, and fail, but then to do, but because of the ranking, it's going to stay in failed. All right, this is something I definitely want to see in better practice, because this whole final status and non-final statuses, this course is not doing a very good job at explaining it. So let's go see if we can take a look at this video and see if we can get more context, because this was bumpy. This was rough. All right, so let's see if in the next minute we can see how this works. All right, so we're going to go into a test here. We have a few tests that are passed and one that's failed. And so we're going to go into the failed one, and we can see that we can change the scope to see if in different versions it passed or failed. In this particular case, it didn't really matter because all versions it failed in. So I don't know what they're trying to show here. You can change and toggle between the environments, and you can see that the statuses are going to either pass or fail based on which environment you were testing in. So this, again, doesn't tell us much other than we can toggle versions and we can check to see if they passed or didn't pass in different versions. This is very interesting. I've always tried to find a use case for why using versions and environments is important. And I think a lot of teams that use Xray, they kind of skip this step. But as you can see, it's pretty critical, especially when you do have much more complex testing environments. Like Xray is pretty powerful. I didn't realize that it can do this level of granularity and help you like call out because it is possible for you to pass in certain environments and fail in others. Like that's a no-brainer. I just didn't know that Xray was capable of that. So what is the overall result? Whenever a test is scheduled for multiple environments, so I don't know that these things have anything of value. So let's go to the next one. Let's see if we can explain it better in the video, because Xray folks, if you're watching this, your course is a little confusing to say the least. We need to get more information on the final status and what that means. Okay, let's look through this video here. We're back in our test here. We're in a sample test. We're gonna, for this latest final status, it's in the status of to do. We're gonna go and create a new test execution. This is where you pick your version and your environment. We didn't pick one, so this is just gonna be a generic. We're gonna pass it. So we passed the execution. We bypassed all the steps. We're gonna apply this and we should get it passed. Yay. Now we're gonna go back into it. I'm assuming we're gonna create another test execution with a different environment. Yeah, see, so we're gonna create another test execution. I'm assuming, they did not pick a different environment. All right, so it's just gonna be considered the latest test run. And they're going to fail it this time. All right, cool. It failed. So now the report for the latest run is going to say failed. But I guess you could go back in time now. Like, I'm not sure what they're trying to tell us other than these reports change. Yes, we know. Okay, so he's going back into the test. I'm assuming they're going to do yet another test execution or test run. Still no versions. They're just going to keep doing this to just show you that it's going to keep a log of all the times that it passed and failed based on those executions. Sure. I think this would be more effective if you were using the environments and the versions, and then you had that extra granular data. But they're just simply showing that the test is going to keep a running tab of all the executions and whether they passed or failed. Again, I don't really see the point here until you start using the fixed versions. Okay, what does this execute immediately mean? I didn't think there was anything autonomously here. Okay, so now we're on to do. So the status is just going to say to do because it hasn't. Oh, wait. Okay. I think I get what I'm looking at. So what I'm seeing is that to do is not a final status. So when we were looking at the latest run, because the to do is not a final status and it hasn't run, it didn't impact the status of the test. However, when we turn that off, it's going to respect whatever the latest status is. So I don't know. I don't know that I know I don't know that I understand the use case for this or why we would want to do this. I would assume you always just want to have the latest final status, but crazier things have happened. Okay, we're going to jump into the next section here, which is going to be assessing the status of a coverable issue. This, I think, is the most important part because at the end of the day, this is, I think, what the executives care about. Like, are we passing the requirement or not? Like, can we fly this plane or not? Right? The individual test steps, they're important, but this is, I think, the high level one. This is what people care about. All right, so the consolidated status of the coverable issue, the requirement for a specific context. So this depends on where and how you're analyzing your requirement. Generally, it represents the latest result obtained for that test in that context. So a high-level overview or more grained assessment can involve consolidating results from multiple test environments. For example, status of a test for version 1.0 depends on consolidating the latest test results from Chrome and Firefox. Now, if you're on the Xray and DC only, the requirement status custom field shown by default in the requirement issue screen provides a sneak peek for it, explained ahead. Where can you view this at? Well, in the requirement, for example, the story here, we'll have our coverage. Okay. In the traceability and test coverage overall requirement report over here, it'll say pass. And then in the requirements list gadget. So a couple of different places. Which tests are considered? So the list of tests that are covered in that cover an issue requirement is not dependent on the version. All linked tests are considered along with the results. This is the most common scenario and thus the one available in Xray Cloud. Xray Server have additional settings and behavior that affects coverage calculation if you want. So if you're on the data center or server versions of Xray, if you wish to control which tests are valid for each version, then you must choose the use version test sets for requirements coverage in the coverage section in Xray setting. For each version, you must create a test set and assign it to the version you want, and only those tests will be considered. Note that this will lead to some additional overhead in your testing process. Recap of the status is available, so we don't have to cover this because we've already covered this. The status of a test impacts the calculated coverage status. So the current status of a test contributes to the calculated coverage. It considers a simplified example. If a test was successful, then the related covered issue can be considered okay, just considering that test. If a test fails, we can say that the requirement is not okay. Oh boy, I need my nap. Contributions from all related tests have to be considered. So as we'll see ahead, requirements that are usually covered by more than one test. Therefore, the rules to assess the coverage status need to consider the different contributions and be decided based on some criteria. In simple words, some contributions are more decisive than others. So how do we assess the coverage status of an issue? So obtain a list of the tests that cover the issue. That's easy. The moment you start linking things together, this becomes available. Calculate the status for a given scope. So this is where you got to use those environments and versions and whatnot. Then our test status is going to impact our coverage status. So calculate the coverage status based on the test. And then you compare the statuses. So if you obtain the list of test status that cover the issue directly or indirectly through sub-requirements, that depends on the coverage configuration in Xray. You're going to calculate the test status for all the tests individually in the given scope. So that's going to consider the test runs in version V as a test result of the version V, test runs in test plan TP within test execution associated with the test plan TP. If a specific environment is also chosen, then only test runs from test executions with this environment will be considered. In case no environment is specified, then all test executions are considered. Calculate the coverage status mapped to the previously calculated test statuses. Compare the previously calculated coverage status altogether. Sub-requirements in Xray and coverage. Coverage may be performed directly or indirectly on sub-requirements. So here we have a requirement. Here we have a sub-requirement. We can apparently apply a test to those sub-requirements, or we can apply the test to the requirement. Sub-requirements are coverable issues that have a relationship to the parent. So how do we, okay, so I'm assuming this is the requirement. These are the sub-requirements. Interesting how Atlassian or Xray converts a traditional like requirement, sub-requirement from the DoD world into Jira. I don't know that I would agree with this. All right, requirements hierarchy. Xray fully supports multiple levels of requirements, but the standard levels is 2. So it is possible to have more than 2 levels using one of the following combinations. So the epic story relationship plus subtask, so that's going to be 3 levels, or the epic story relationship plus a specific issue link. That's going to be tricky. I wouldn't go that route. Xray is limited to 2 levels of requirements in some places. Interesting. The coverage status of the parent requirement will consider the sub-requirement statuses. So if we're okay if the, what in the world is this telling me? If the requirements are requirements okay, then all this, I don't even know what this means. Oh boy, I'm falling asleep. I am not prepared to be doing a 1-hour live stream, apparently, even though I do a 1-hour live stream once a week. Test on the sub-requirements versus test on the parent requirement. You would obtain the same value for the calculation of the status of the parent requirement if you consider that it is being covered by all the explicitly linked tests and also the ones linked to the sub-requirements. I don't get this. I don't get what this is telling me. If the requirement's okay, we get an okay. Okay, I see. If we have an okay and a not okay, we're not okay. If we're okay, not run, okay. Not okay, okay, we get a not okay. So basically, this is a little matrix that shows you what is the ultimate status going to be based on the combination of the sub-requirement and the requirement. Interesting. Uncovered, no tests. Okay, that means everything passed. Not run means we have one that's not in to do or executing. Not okay means we failed one. All right, let's look at the video and let's hope that this makes a lot more sense. Turn off the audio. This is a little bit of a longer one, so let's see what we got going on here. So here we are inside of a story. We're uncovered because we don't have any tests. So we're going to fix that problem by making a test. And so once we make a couple of tests, because we're going to make a few of them, that status of not covered should change because now we have at least 3 tests that are going to be covering this particular test. Now we're in the status of not run because all of our tests are in to do. Now we're going to fire off a sub-test execution. We're not going to do anything special other than fire off a sub-test execution, which is basically the same thing as a test execution. We're then going to run through this test, right? We're going to be able to, step through it, hit the play button, go through each step, do what we got to do there. But the key point is that we're changing the statuses of these tests so that we ultimately have a status with execution. This case is going to be executing because we have 1 pass, but 2 that are not done. But as you can see here, we're cheating and we're going to mark them all to done, I'm assuming. Maybe not. Let's see what they're trying to do here. We're going back to the story. They took a very long route to the story. You can see that because we still have a to-do, we technically have not run. I would have changed this to executing. Like, I don't know, the moment you have 1 pass, I would have put executing, but I guess that's different. So now that we passed the 3 tests, we can go to the story and you're going to see that this is now okay. Now, I'm assuming they're going to go now into this test and fail one. Am I not showing my screen? When did that happen? This guy. Thanks. This is why it's helpful to have people live here to help me remember that we got to share our screens. I wonder how we stopped sharing our screen. We'll figure that one later. All right, so yeah. So now we failed one, and so we're going back to the story, and we're basically determining that the story or the execution here is the coverage is not okay because one of our tests failed. And so that's okay that it failed. We're going to create another test execution. And this is going to give us another opportunity to pass or fail a bunch of tests. Because every time you create a test execution, you start fresh with a whole new set. And we're going to come back in here and see that we have this particular latest run, but I'm assuming we can change the runs. We're going to change the run here. And you can see that these are all the ones that haven't ran yet. And so we're just going to change them all to past. A little bit easier than last time, I suppose. Now when we go to the test or to the story itself, you can see that this is okay because we were able to run multiple test executions. All right. We're going to jump into assessing the status of a coverable issue. So we have example number 4 where the sub requirement is not okay. So as long as one of these fail, folks, we're going to have a not okay here. If we have a sub requirement or not run, as long as one of them is to do. And then we're going to have uncovered if we have no tests covering that sub requirement. So that's simple to understand. Let's take a look at this video and let's see what's going on over here. So again, we have a story and we're going out to the epic and it's uncovered because it doesn't have any tests. We need tests. But the story itself is also uncovered because it doesn't have any tests. So we're going to go and we're going to go to the sub requirements. Remember, the way that they're treating it here is that the epic is the requirement and the story is the sub requirement. And all we've done is associated a test with this particular story. Now we go over to the epic and we can see that the epic is inheriting a status of not run because the story, right? Remember, the test coverage is encompassed by all the associated and related items. And so in this particular case, even though we only put the test at the story level, because it's linked to that epic is going to show that the work is not executed yet. So here we're actually going to go into a test execution and we're going to pass this, right? We're passing this test specifically within the test execution, which is then tied to the story. We're going to jump over to 872, which should be the story, or should be calculating for the story, right? This is going to have an okay, but now when we go to the epic, I'm assuming he's going to go up to the epic. They definitely take a really long route to get to the epic. We don't do it like this in the cloud anymore, but this one should say okay as well because the sub requirement passed as well. So you can see the trickle up effect. So that was interesting. That's a pretty important thing to know. Now this little section here, we're going to go over it quite quickly because this is only for the data center and server. And that is a dying breed, folks. So an Xray provides a quick way to have a sneak peek at the statuses of test and coverable issues. Example, requirements for certain scopes. How is my requirement on the versions that are assigned to it? And how is my test on the version that we're currently working on? So the behavior of these fields is managed globally in the Xray settings. Again, this test run status, test set status, and requirement status, these are all specific and calculated only for data center and server versions of Xray. So we're not going to worry too much about them because we don't get to see them. So when you have this enabled in the Xray of server or data center, you're going to see that you have these fields because it's a custom field, right? It's going to show up in the work item itself. And so you can actually even see the test status here. So these are actually kind of cool. I'm surprised that Xray hasn't figured out a way to bring this over to the cloud, but it's a pretty cool and interesting method. All right. No test today, folks. We are not taking the test. And so this one's, I'm going to give it a 6. I think we need better examples. We need better examples to understand the concepts here. This was a tricky one. This was very dry material and a little bit harder to see. Okay, so give them a 6 out of 10. Next up, let's see where we're at. We're almost done with this one here. Learn more and thank you. Complete the unit. All right, we are done. I'm going to download that certificate so I can give it to my boss so they know that I finished this. And we're going to go over to test automation with Xray. So folks, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Drop a like as we're going to come back tomorrow and take a look at this test automation with Xray. So this is going to be a little bit, this is a very long one. We're probably going to be here for a while, but test automation is definitely one of those topics that's even harder than test coverage. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye, everyone.